Okay, Rabbi Jacoby, do you want to just check Facebook to make sure that we have sound on the live stream? If we have it on Facebook, we have it on YouTube and LinkedIn. I just want to double check that the live stream is working okay. To all those who are watching live stream land, we're going to start in about 2 minutes or so. So just bear with us. I know we said 7:30, but this is one of our first hybrid events. Probably. I don't know if we've done a hybrid event before. So we want to give everyone time to file in. So we're going to be starting momentarily if you're in Facebook land. Just keep an eye, and we'll be going soon. Rabbi Jacoby, how's our sound in the stream?
I'm going to go out there, so I don't...
Yeah, just let us know. So I'm going to keep talking right now just as a warm-up as people are making it in, and we're checking all our tech to make sure that you can actually hear us in live stream lands. We're not sure if you can or you can't. We're good? Oh, we got the thumbs up, you can hear us. So, okay, we're going to get rolling. So we're going to get rolling here. So first off, welcome to the people who braved coming out in person in this beautiful Cleveland weather. And the with the uptick in the what's it called again? Oh, yeah, the coronavirus. We're glad we have some people here in person. By the way, for those of you who are with us in person, the refreshments are there to be enjoyed. Don't be bashful about getting up while I'm speaking at any point and eat, because the food is here to enjoy. As I always say, seconds are encouraged, thirds are admired. So please, we don't want to have any leftovers. For those of you who are watching at home on the live stream, go to the kitchen, get yourself a snack at any point. Don't worry, I won't protest, I won't stop you. You can have all the snacks you want. So anyhow. Okay, so our topic for tonight is Jews and I'm sorry, what is it again? Oh yeah, Christmas and the Jews. We're going to be talking about the fact that, I don't know if you know, but there was a holiday for the nations of the world that happened this past Shabbos. And it was not just Shabbos, which is a holiday in and of itself. Wonderful holiday, comes every 7 days. But there was the holiday of Christmas. Now, you might, out of the gate, off the bat, so to speak, say, Rabbi, why are you bothering me about Christmas on December, what is it, the 28th? That's like 3 days ago. And we all know when the news cycle, the media cycle like it is today, 3 days is a ton of time. And so, you're 362 days early for next Christmas. Why in the world are you speaking about Christmas on December 28th? So let's first put it into context. The reason why you think you're 3 days late for Christmas is because you all live here in America. Or I assume most people watching are somewhere in the Western world, and therefore you think Christmas already happened. But if you are, in fact, part of the Russian Orthodox Church or other parts of the Greek Orthodox Church, especially in the East, especially in former Soviet states, then for you, Christmas doesn't come until January 7th. So you're really about still a week and a half earlier or so. Now, what is that all about? How many people, just by show of hands, I can't tell on the live stream, show of hands, but here in Milky Way, on Warrensville and Cleveland, how many people ever knew that there was more than one Christmas? Okay, so we got a few people. So here's where it comes from. This takes a little bit of comprehending numbers. So if you don't like numbers, you can tune out and then tune back in when we're done. But there was the calendar that we have today, secular calendar that we use, is known as the Gregorian Calendar. And it was proposed originally by Pope Gregory XIII in the year 1582. And the issue was that the Julian calendar, which had been the world calendar since the year 45 before the Common Era, so 1600 years at that point, the Julian calendar was very advanced for its time, for 45 BCE, but they made a slight mathematical error when they calculated the Julian calendar. The Julian calendar was calculated that the solar year was 365.25 days, 365 and a quarter days. Okay, what they figured out eventually, already by the year 800, 900, maybe 1,000, they had already started to discover that they were actually off by not a quarter day, but a quarter of a quarter day. In other words, the new calculation for the day is 365.2425 days. Sorry, the year is 365.2425 days. Okay, so they were off by a 2,500th of a day or whatever it was. Now, that's all fine from 1 year to the next. That's even fine within a leap year cycle of 4 years. But as we mentioned, the Julian calendar started in the year 45 before the Common Era. So by the year 1582, 600 years later, those 0.0025 days had added up to almost 11 days at that point. And you can do your math. If you add basically 0.0025 days for every year, it continues to add more days. By the way, for those of you who are fans of Today in Jewish History, which I'm sure you all are, I'm sure you all listen to it or watch it or read it every single day, but we officially hit our 100,000th download for this year today. And this was always a challenge. This point was always a challenge for me because the Today in Jewish History is based on the Jewish calendar. If you notice, like today was the 24th of Teves. So we told about Dessler's Yahrzeit, Leo Dessler's Yahrzeit, which was today, which happened on the 24th of the Jewish month of Teves. That's easy because that happened only 60-something years ago. But what is quite difficult is when we were trying to write on events that we only had the secular date for, and that took place sometime between the year 45 before the Common Era and 1562 of the Common Era. So to try and make sure and figure out what the Jewish date was, and we only had the secular date, we had a whole mathematical equation when we were looking for events to write about in Today in Jewish History. So anyways, but what this has to do with our topic tonight is that when the Gregorian calendar was replaced the Julian calendar, then the originators, Pope Gregory III, the Pope Gregory XIII was Catholic, which meant that originally the Catholic Church were the only ones who listened. And in 1582, once they made the correction, originally it was just Spain, Portugal, France, Poland, Italy, any place where there was Catholic law, Luxembourg, and thereof, those are the only ones who followed it. And it's I have a list here of when other countries came into the fold. It's very interesting to point out that Great Britain, was 200 years later. So even though at that point that was before the Protestant Reformation, and Britain was still officially Catholic, but they weren't so aligned with the Catholic Church, the forerunner to the Protestant Reformation, and it took them 200 years to catch up and do it. Now, a little trivia question: what was the last country to take on the Gregorian calendar? Anyone want to hazard to guess? Because when you guess, it's a hazard. I'll give you a clue. It's one of the richest countries in the Middle East. I know it's not the UAE, Saudi Arabia, right? Saudi Arabia in 2016 officially adopted the Gregorian calendar. Before that was using the Julian calendar. But again, I think we have to appreciate the Julian calendar got it so right in the year 45 before the Common Era. Now, I'll dispel a common misnomer on calendars. So who do you think originated the Julian calendar in the year 45 before the Common Era? Take a guess. Julius Caesar, who was the emperor of the Roman Empire at the time. Now, Julius Caesar liked calendars. How do we know? Because this was his second major intersection with the calendar. His first major intersection took place the year before this, in the year 44 before the Common Era, when what happened? He got a month named after him. Right? The Romans Senate in the year 44 before the Common Era, 43 before the Common Era, passed a law that the seventh month of the calendar should be named after their emperor, Julius Caesar. Now, what month is that? July. Now, Julius Caesar's protege and successor, Augustus or Octavius Caesar, also wanted the same thing for himself, and he got the month August, right? Two longest months in the calendar, both 31 days right next to each other. Now, okay, so that's where July and August come from. There is probably a myth, but I'll tell you the source of the myth, that if you look at the months that follow July and August, what are the months? September, October, November, December. What do those mean in Greek/Latin? What does September mean? The 7th month. What does October mean? The 8th month, right? What does November mean? The 9th month. What does December mean? The 10th month. So there's only one problem. September is the 9th month, and October is the 10th month, and November is the 11th month, and December is the 12th month. It's called the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th month. So I'll tell you the common misconception, then I'll tell you the common legend, and then I'll tell you what historians think. So the common misconception is that when Julius Caesar added in the month of July, that there were only 10 months, and July became the 7th month, but making it 11 months. And when Augustus Caesar came to add in August, then it became a 12-month calendar. That's not true. The Roman calendar already, for many centuries before this, was already a 12-month calendar. They just simply changed the names of the month to be Julius and Augustus, or July and August. Now, the Roman legend is that Romulus was the one who transitioned from the 10-month calendar to the 12-month calendar, and that the 10-month calendar was also a 31 day month calendar, and they had 50 no man land days in the calendar at the end of the year. it's kind of like me, every day I like to, take a little bit of time, set aside and just forget about it. That way at the end of the year, I have a few days to myself. But, that's what Roman legend says what Romulus did. He had a 300-day calendar and like 50 extra days that he kind of let slide. Now, the problem with that is, first of all, it's a question if Romulus ever existed. Romulus is the legendary first emperor or the founder of the Roman Empire. And so the question if he ever existed in human form other than being a legend. And beyond that, most historians think that there was never a 10-month Roman calendar, that it's just that the names get changed and shifted around. And when they added in July and August, the months did shift. Like, in fact, there was a 7th month called September, and they shifted, but there were also always 12 months on the Roman calendar from time immemorial, and the legend of the 10-month calendar probably is not true. But if you guys want to move this, I just put this here so it'd be easier for people to grab napkins, but you can move it. Anyhow, okay, so for those of you who don't like numbers, don't like calendars, you can tune back in now. We're basically done with calendars, but what it has to do with us tonight is the Eastern Orthodox Church, which, again, quick Christian church history lesson, is the Christian church was originally the Roman Catholic Church. Rome became Catholic in the year 350 before the Common Era, became Christian, and from the year roughly 350 till somewhere around 550, 650, whatever it was, there was only one church. It was that church. Then the Roman Empire splits into two. You have the Holy Roman Empire, which was neither holy nor was it Roman, but it was housed in Italy. Rome coming in, and that's what we call Catholicism, the Catholic Church. That's the Western Christian church. And then you had what is called the Byzantium Church, or the Byzantine Empire, and what became known as the Eastern Orthodox Church, because it was based in Istanbul, Constantinople, depending on what day you go there. And this time it was called Byzantium. And the Eastern Orthodox Church until this day is still more similar to more backwards, less forward thinking than the Catholic Church, which in and of itself isn't exactly forward thinking. But the Eastern Orthodox Church tends to be a little bit more primitive, and that's basically now quite often called the Russian Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church. Those are the two major churches, but it's either former Soviet Union states, or Greece is about the furthest west that the Russian Orthodox or the Greek Orthodox Church comes, and everywhere else really in the Christian world, for the most part, they're observing Christmas on the 25th. But since the Eastern Orthodox Church is still keeping the Julian calendar, they will observe Christmas on January 7th. Now, like our holidays vis-a-vis the secular calendar, it's always gaining, as I said, 0.0025 days every year. So I think right now, like, it's 11 days off from Christmas. Well, 7th is 11 days or 12, whatever. I think next year, in the next few years, is going to gain another day, and it'll be on the 8th of January. So that's why it's very apropos to still talk about this tonight, because we're still smack in the middle of Christmas season, depending on which church you go with. Okay, that's by way of introduction, long introduction. Now, how many of you saw the article I wrote about wishing someone Merry Christmas? Okay, so don't worry, if you missed it, we'll give a quick recap. I had an article on H.com about, what was the name of the article? It was, is it okay to say Merry Christmas? Or what's wrong with Merry Christmas? And that got both me and my research team, aka my wife, very fascinated with the topic of Jews and Christmas and the interplay over the years. And so that's a lighter version of this discussion. We'll go a little bit deeper into some of the topics tonight. So, because really this is Natalie's fault, because she said the only problem with the article is it was too short, so I figured I had to give her some more information on the topic. So, okay. We have to understand, first of all, before we come to appreciate Jews and Christmas, we have to appreciate Jews and Christianity. So a quick background on how that came about. So Christianity is, first of all, very hard to define as a religion today, because unlike Judaism, where you have only a handful of what we call different sects of Judaism, and you have, like, maybe within the Orthodox, you've got different Hasidic groups, and within the Lithuanian Orthodox groups, you have different yeshivas, but all somewhat similar. And then you have a handful of non-Orthodox, movements. But for the most part, there's only so many different ways to be Jewish nowadays. So, if you want to count, depending on how you count the different groups, there's, I don't know, 10, 20, maybe tops in the Jewish people. By the Muslims, there's about 300, and by the Christians, there's thousands. There are thousands of different Christian sects. Every time you see a different church with a different name on it, it means they have a different slant on their approach to Christianity. Now, a lot of them are offshoots of different things, like we mentioned, the Russian Orthodox Church, the Roman Catholic Church, or the Protestant Reformation and the Protestant Church. But then there's all kinds of offshoots of that, including the most wackiest, which is the Church of the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. In my humble opinion, they go back to biblical times, about 1850 in America, and totally rewrite the whole story. So it's when we talk about Christian beliefs, it really depends on which time in history, and which place in the world you're talking about to be able to say what's going on. Okay, but up until from the inception of Christianity on the map until the year 350, Christianity was, for the most part, at least for the first 100 years, was an offshoot of Judaism. In other words, early Christians did grow out of the Jewish people. Now, how do we know this? We don't really know this from the Talmud, because the Talmud makes very few mentionings of Christianity whatsoever. But where we do know it from is that we see that the Midrashim Talmud doesn't talk about this. When the Midrashim talks about it, is before the destruction of the Second Temple, it says the Midrash says Chav Tad Kitim B'Yerushalayim. There are 24 different sectarian groups in Jerusalem. So in other words, that means there are 24 groups vying for power, 24 groups that had a different take on Judaism that existed within Jerusalem. And some of those we know more about, and we know more about what they did. We today, no matter who you are, if you're alive and Jewish today, you're a descendant of the Perushim, the Pharisees. And the other popular groups, the one that really was a thorn in the side of Jewish people for probably 1,000 years or more in different forms, was the Tzaddukim, or the Sadducees. Another popular group mentioned was the Aseans. Now, the Aseans were a very holier-than-thou group that lived down by the Dead Sea. They did not procreate, which was not good for business or sustaining your business. They believed in going to the mikveh very, very often. They were very austere. They abstained from a lot of physical enjoyments of the world. And we know for a fact that a lot of the early Christian groups in Israel were involved with the Aseans. Now, does that mean we would go as far as to say the Aseans morphed into the Christians? We don't have enough information, but what we do know is someone like John the Baptist, if he existed in the time when the Christian Bible says he existed, was an Asean before he became a Christian. And what we know about a lot of the Asean customs is very similar to a lot of the early Christian customs. For example, to become an Asean, you had to be initiated by going to the mikveh. Christians call that baptism. We already mentioned the idea of celibacy. And the Catholic Church, which is the highest religious leader, it's either it's the Pope, right? Or if you're not the Pope, to start off to become Pope, you have to first become a nun or a monk, right? And what is one of the things that you have to swear to become a nun or a monk? Celibacy, right? Right there with the Aseans. So there were certain things in the early Christians, or even the Roman Catholic Church today, that we see from the little bit that we know about the Aseans. Okay, could be that they were the early Christians, could not be, but we at least know there was a connection between the two. We think John the Baptist was an Asean, as I said. John the Baptist was one of the followers of Jesus. And it could be that Jesus was with the Aseans. Less likely Jesus was there. Because when we want to understand who was Jesus from a Jewish perspective, it is very, very complicated. The reason it's complicated is because, first of all, as I mentioned before, our main source of knowledge from this time is the Talmud. Right? The Talmud, even though it's I guess, arguably a law book, but also has a collection of homiletics, and to a certain extent, it's a history book as well. The Talmud makes a handful of mentions of Jesus, maybe 10 in the over 2,000 folio pages of the Talmud. And I'll go ahead and tell you, most of them are not very nice. Okay? There are other, what we call chazals, midrashim, or other works from the same time period that mention him. Again, also not very nice. Now, the biggest difficulty vis-a-vis our discussion is all of those different statements of our sages that talk about Jesus, all put him in a different time period. The Talmud, when referencing Jesus, talks about him as a student of Yehoshua ben Prachia. Yehoshua ben Prachia was the head of the Sanhedrin at the time of the Maccabees, aka the Hanukkah story. Anyone know what year the Hanukkah story took place? 139 before the Common Era. Now, according to the Christian Church, what year was Jesus born? The year 0. right? Or actually the year 1, sorry, the year 0, right? There's 1 BCE and then 1 CE, right? That's why they call it AD. I don't know what AD means in secular terminology. And Domino, right? The year of our Lord, meaning we're counting from the year Jesus was born. That's what they call it. And what's BC? Before Christ, right? By the way, just so you know, the word Christ in Latin means Mashiach. Just so you know what the word actually means. Like people don't want to say it or say it, don't say it. And I wouldn't say it in reference to Jesus, but it means Mashiach. It's the Latin word for Mashiach because that's what they said. Jesus was the Messiah. Okay, so the Talmud puts Jesus circa already a student, means he had to be, 15, 20, 30, at 139 B. So you have to say that at the earliest he's born is 160 BCE, right? BCEs go that direction, right? And that's already years off from the Catholic Church or the Christianity in general. Okay, that's one approach. Another approach is that of the other statements of our sages, which line up more with what the Christian Bible says, which say that he lived at a time of Hortus Agrippus, aka Herod Agrippa, who's not the famous Herod who rebuilt the temple and all that is mentioned many times in the Talmud, and there was the Roman puppet governor of Israel. This was either his son or his grandson, who Herod, the famous Herod, dies in the year 2, or somewhere around there. And Herod Agrippa is the Roman leader of Israel circa the year 30, 32, when the Christian Bible says Jesus lived. So whatever statements we have attributed him to Herod Agrippa, same time period, line up with what the Christians say. There are other statements of our sages that say Jesus's father was a student of Rebbe Akiva. Rebbe Akiva was alive to see the destruction of the Second Temple, but that was before he started learning Torah, right? Famous story of Rebbe Akiva, if you're watching the Jewish Destiny series last week, I think it was, we went into it. Rebbe Akiva was an ignoramus the first 40 years of his life. At the age of 40, he goes to yeshiva and starts a path on becoming a scholar. By the age of 64, he's the greatest scholar in the Jewish world with a yeshiva of 24,000 students, and he lives well into his hundreds. So if we assume that Rebbe Akiva was probably born around the year 50, we would say he went to yeshiva around the year 90 and opened up his own yeshiva, let's say somewhere around the year 100, 110, somewhere around there, and then was martyred in the year probably about 134, 135 after the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Okay, so the problem is, so if you say that Rebbe Akiva was functioning as a Rosh Yeshiva, as a head of yeshiva from roughly the year 100 to 135, then our friend Jesus would have had to have been already in the year somewhere around there too, because his father was a student. There were certain interactions between Rebbe Akiva, his father, Jesus. Okay, so that's where it becomes very difficult to understand part of who he was and for sure what time period he lived in, because we don't have a clear picture. The other thing that makes it very difficult is we do have the first, besides Tanakh and the Talmud, the first famous history of the Jews is written at this time. Anyone know what it's called? It's named after the author. Josephus, right? Flavius Josephus, or Josephus Flavius, or Yosef ben Mattityahu Kohen was his Jewish name. Josephus Flavius. With Romans, I never got straight which one comes first, the last name or the first name, right? They talk about Deo Cassius, Cassius Deo, and same thing with Josephus Flavius, Josephus, or Josephus Flavius, but whatever it was. Yosef ben Mattityahu Kohen, who died circa the year also probably 100, and all of his writings, which if you get them today in English, they're about this thick, written in about the 3-point font, so you have to have magnifying glass to read it. There are no direct mentionings of Jesus at all. There are certain mentionings that we know were put in by the Christian censors at a later date, and as we know they're forgeries, we know they're not accurate. And whatever mentionings there are of a character named Jesus and Josephus do not line up at all with what the Christian Bible says. The timing doesn't line up, the story doesn't line up, nothing lines up. So we have, which is with a very serious problem, that the two main Jewish sources that are being written at the time that the Christian church says Jesus lived, which would be the Talmud and Josephus, basically ignore Jesus, right? And every later mentioning we have seems to put him a lot earlier or a lot later. So that makes things very difficult. If anyone's interested, I ran off a copy of a great article. It's written by a friend of mine named Rav Yosef Quadrat, who's a fascinating scholar and historian living from London. And he wrote a great article on, the topic is that we just had the fast day, the 10th of Teves, a few weeks ago. And I don't want to go too much into it because it'll take us off course, but there's a discussion of the fast of the 10th of Teves being for a number of events. One of them being in memory to someone by the name of Shimon Kalfus. According to a lot of people, and even commentators talk about this, some people think Shimon Kalfus was Peter from the early Jesus Makarvim, right? From the early Jesus followers. He goes through this article that there's a mistake that Shimon Kalfus was Jesus' uncle and was working together with the rabbis at the time, the Perushim, the Pharisees, to take Christianity away from Judaism and promote it to the pagans. That is not to be confused with someone else whose name was, he mentions it here in the article, Shimon ben Kepa, who became Peter, who became Jesus' disciple, Peter. Okay, that's the main tone of the article, but to put it into context, he gives a summary of a book called Toldos Yeshu HaNatzri. Toldos is always a word in a Jewish sense we talk about like a lineage or a history, and Yeshu HaNatzri is one of the sort of fun names we call Jesus, because we don't like to talk about him because there's a lot of Jewish bloodshed that came in his name. So Yeshu is an acronym for the letters Yamach Shemo V'Zichron, which means his name should be erased from history. And there's another one he actually brings on here that they actually, in this particular writings in the book of Toldos Yeshu HaNatzri, they call him. It's something similar to that. You can look at the article if you're interested, but made about 10 copies. If it's not enough for anyone, I can give you the article. But the reason I print it up is because what's fascinating is the summary he has of the book Toldos Yeshu HaNatzri. Now, the origins of Toldos Yeshu HaNatzri are somewhat unknown. Where they are common is we'll talk about something called Nitzelnacht shortly. There are different communities who had the custom of reading Toldos Yeshu HaNatzri on Christmas Eve, and that's how it became popular. But what it does two things. First of all, it ropes together these different statements of our sages together with what's said in the Christian Bible, making it appear as if it's one time period, but it's almost, there's like a comic relief to it, because you know that Yehoshua ben Prachia and Rabbi Akiva were 250 years apart, and it's talking about them like they're at the same time, because that's how you could piece together Jesus. It does not have very nice things to say about Jesus. It definitely refers to him, for example, if according to Christianity, Mary was his mother, but Joseph was not his father, yet Mary was married to Joseph. So what does that make Jesus in Jewish law? A mamzer, right? Because it means that his father was someone other than his wife. I don't care if it's God or whoever it is. If it's not his husband, if it's not her husband, he's a mamzer, right? He's a bastard child. But anyways, that's the tone. So if anyone's interested, take a look at it, and sort of streams together the different statements of our sages and how they sort of piece together. Who really our sages come out with is either a composite character like he's dealt with in Toldos Yeshu HaNatzri, or something totally different. Now, this was even an issue within the early church, okay? So from basically sometime around the year 98, probably a little earlier than that, I'd say 40, 50, when Christianity we know starts, for the first 50, maybe 100 years, it's a real issue within the Jewish community. And that's the backdrop of Toldos Yeshu HaNatzri, that Shimon Kalfus is commissioned to go take it away from Judaism, but basically from that point, roughly the year 40 or 50 till the year 350, it's a fledgling movement trying to gain ground, not doing very well. And I have to admit that they're not treated very nice by the Jewish establishment in any way, shape, or form. Now, in 350, the tables turn on the Jews, and that is that Catherine, the mother of Constantine the Great, the Roman emperor at the time, becomes Christian, and with it encourages her son to become Christian. And in antiquity, if the emperor became Christian, your whole empire became Christian. Now, there was some back and forth over the next few emperors before Rome becomes Christian, but this is the beginning of Rome becoming Christian, and definitely by the end of the 4th century, Christianity is a force to be reckoned with, because the Roman Empire, which is a large amount of the world at that point, most of the world, is now Christian. Now, there's an issue that the church was dealing with circa before this point and after this point, somewhere towards the end of the 3rd century and on to the end of the 4th century, for that 100 years. That is, based on a lot of what we've said here, they all knew this then, right? Church doesn't talk about this today, but they knew it then. And so, therefore, there is a debate amongst the Christians at the time. Well, was Jesus a historical character, or was he just a spirit? Did he exist? Did he not exist? Was he a person? Was he not a person? That was a debate amongst many of the early church fathers. And the opinion that he was, in fact, a human being who lived and walked on this planet was the opinion that won out. And the church in the latter part of the 4th century wanted to make sure to solidify the idea that he was a real human being. How do they do that? They gave him a birthday. Right? Nowhere in the Christian Bible, you can scour it upside down, inside out, you can read it in Hebrew, English, Latin, whatever you want to read it in, you will not find a birthday for Jesus anywhere in the Christian Bible. The Christian Bible in 2 places describes the birth of Jesus, something known as the Nativity. And what is clear from the description is it was not in the winter. Who has ever been in Israel this time of year? Is it comfortable outside or is it wintertime? It's wintertime. It's cold, right? It's maybe not as cold as Cleveland, but it is, it could be 30, 40 degrees December in Israel, in Bethlehem, right? Nazareth, wherever it was. The Christian Bible describes that when Jesus was born, it was a time when the shepherds were sleeping outside with their sheep. What time of year do you think that happened? Spring, summer? Definitely not in the winter, right? And definitely not in that part of Israel in the winter, because it was cold outside. In fact, in that time, we know that people who were in charge of livestock would actually bring the livestock inside, and they would live together with sheep inside. So there's no way that there was an outside nativity, which is clearly described in the Christian Bible, in December. Okay? Which begs the question, okay, I understand they want to give him a birthday because they want to give him a birthday because they want to make him mortal. They want to make him, once being a human being. So why in the world do they pick one that doesn't really fit with their Bible? The answer is because they were not only trying to give him a birthday and make him a mortal human being, but they were trying to inculcate the Roman Empire into being Christians. And the church fathers at this time had a very, very, entrepreneurial idea on how to spread their religion, that not only were they taking over the whole empire and making it Catholic and making it Christian, but they also were taking a lot of the popular pagan customs, holidays, and even the pagan gods to a certain extent, and incorporating them into the religion. They were taking the pagan holidays, making them Christian holidays. They were taking the pagan gods, making them saints, etc., etc. And that was a great way to get local buy-in. Come join our religion. You do everything exactly the same, just call Christianity, and we're good, right? Pay us taxes and we're good. And that's what they did. So there was a very popular Roman holiday that was circa December 25th, maybe a little bit earlier, but was observed on the time period of the winter solstice. And it was the most popular holiday on the Roman calendar and the Roman culture at that point. And so the church fathers said, okay, it doesn't exactly line up with what it says in our Bible at the time of year, but it's the most popular holiday. And we want to ensure widespread celebration of Jesus' birthday. So therefore, we're going to merge the 2 together, hence putting Jesus' birthday on December 25th. Okay, that's where it came from. This ends up posing probably the greatest threat to the Jewish people. Probably from the time of its, shortly after its inception, but for sure as the years would play on. And that is because the Roman solstice holiday wasn't a holiday where they went to midnight mass, gave presents under the tree, and drank eggnog. That is not what they were doing. It was a holiday with a lot of drinking, frivolous, immoral behavior, and we'll see, it was a great time to lynch a Jew. Right? That was very popular on this holiday. And so the Catholic Church basically trades in mass observance of their Savior's birthday for some customs that don't necessarily align with what their religion believes in. But, in order to get observed, that's what they did. So in many parts of the Christian world, from roughly the late 4th century on to for sure until the really modern times, really until we see Christians come to America, not in every community, but in a lot of communities, that's how Christmas was observed. It was observed with a lot of drinking, a lot of partying, a lot of frivolous behavior, and that's how it was observed. And as we talked about in the article, that even the term Mary in Old English or Middle English usually had connotation. Nowadays we think of Mary as be happy, right? Don't worry, be happy, be merry. There's nothing wrong with the word Mary in modern English for sure. But in Middle English, Mary was more like go get blushed, right? Or go get shook, or go get trashed. When you say go be married to someone or describe someone as Mary, you're usually talking about them being intoxicated and probably behaving in certain ways that you and I wouldn't want our children or ourselves behaving. And that's what the word often meant. So it's interesting how now the phrase Merry Christmas didn't necessarily always mean that, but it probably did in many cases because in many communities, the observance of Christmas was getting drunk and doing a lot of terrible things. So they would say, Merry Christmas. It was like saying, go get drunk and have a party. That's what they were saying when they would say words, Merry Christmas. Now, what does this all have to do with the Jews? This is like a long way. We mentioned how it started with the Jews, but definitely at the time of Shimon Kalfas moved far away from the Jews. But what does this basically in more modern times have to do with Jews? So let me ask you a question. If you have marauding groups on their holiday who their observance is getting drunk, partying, and they are in places like, I don't know, Poland, Russia, and the like, what do you think would often be done to the Jewish community on this night in antiquity? There were pogroms. It was a very, very, very popular night for pogroms. Because, you know, the anti-Semitic non-Jew in the bottle usually didn't end well for the Jews. And therefore, it was often a night known for having a lot of pogroms, which is most likely the origin for a very popular custom amongst the Hasidim, not much observed in groups outside of Hasidic groups today, but the origins of this custom were long before the Hasidim, mentioned first by Trumas Adeshin, about 400 years before the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, ever came about, and that is the concept of Nittelnacht. Who's ever heard of Nittelnacht? Nittelnacht is basically Yiddish. Nittelnacht means, Nittel is coming from the Hebrew word like Tola or Nitzle. It means the one who was hung, and Nacht means night. The night of the one who was hung. Right? That's what the phrase means, referring to the night of December 24th. Now, where did this custom come from of Nittelnacht? Meaning when I say custom, I say even like the Jewish calendar, the Jewish community recognizing it in any way. And where it originated from, we'll look at the main custom. The main custom for Nittelnacht is not to learn Torah. Right? So if we had any, I don't know if we have any Hasidim here tonight, but if we had any Hasidim, Ramon, you dive into Tzemach Tzedek, so they were probably big into it there, right? Right, they have a chess tournament, or they play poker, or whatever it is, right? I always say, like, everyone needs an outlet in their life, so that's the one chance to play cards. No one yells at you, right? But in Hasidic communities today, they don't learn Torah and on the night of December 24th, and that is the observance of Nittelnacht. And like Ramon said, they'll play cards, they'll play chess. They're, like we mentioned with the Totas Yeshua Natsu, certain communities where they'll make little plays and make fun of the whole thing. But it's only widely observed in Hasidic communities today. Now, it predates the Hasidim by 300 years, give or take. So now it's only Ashkenazi in nature. Sephardim, no Sephardi community anywhere has a custom of Nittelnacht. Well, that's Yiddish, call it Nittelnacht, but whatever. No recognition of the day whatsoever. But that makes sense because in general, the Jews fared much better when it came to anti-Semitism in Sephardic countries than they did in Ashkenazi countries, except when the church took over, like in Spain and Portugal and places like that. But in places where the Jews fled after Spain and Portugal, like the Mediterranean Basin and North Africa and whatnot, those are places where Jews were, well, I don't want to say it was all hunky-dory. For the most part, Jews were left alone and pogroms were not a big deal for the most part. But in the Ashkenazi world, it was much different. In places like Poland, Russia, Ukraine, etc., it was very common. So the custom, as is explained by a lot of writings, of not studying Torah on Christmas night, the origins of it were probably that the Jews would not study Torah publicly. In other words, they would not go to the study hall, they would not go to the shul. The decree, so to speak, the custom was stay home this night. Now, in, let's say Trumas Adeshin's time in the 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, up until the modern printing press and the dissemination of Jewish books, if you wanted to study Jewish texts, how did you do it? You had to go to the shul or the study hall, or you had to, first of all, you probably had a study partner, and second of all, you didn't own the scrolls necessarily at home. It's not like today where we have Art Scroll and the great the great proliferation of Jewish books, and we all have big Jewish libraries. That it was all handwritten, all on scrolls, and you have the scrolls that you had, but for the most part, you had your central study halls, your Butz Midrashos, where people go to study. So the custom was not to go to the study hall on Christmas Eve because of the fear of a pogrom. Because again, imagine a situation, a drunken group of people coming by, and they see the candles burning in the Jewish study hall, and what a great mix for a pogrom. So the most early origins of the of Nittelnacht, not saying Torah, Nittelnacht, were most likely Jews not wanting to get lynched by a pogrom. That's where it comes from. Okay, long before the Chassidim come about. When the Chassidim come about in the 17th and 18th century, and by the way, it's also before the Arizal, who was the father of modern day Kabbalah, if you will. Like the Arizal is 50 to 100 years after the Trumas Session. So what happens after the Arizal, and especially the rise of Chassidim, there's certain Kabbalistic ideas put onto the day. I'm not a Kabbalist, so I can't speak to it. I'm not Chassidic. I don't know a lot of Chassidus, but certain concept of what we call klipos, which mean little dark pieces of impurity in the atmosphere, and the concept is those klipos, those dark influences, shouldn't interact with Torah, so therefore Torah shouldn't be studied. I would really think it's the opposite. If there's a darkness in the world, we should study Torah because the light of the Torah should counteract it. But be it as it may, far be it for me to argue with Chassidim. But that's they in the 16th and 17th century. I'm sorry, the 17th and 18th century, they put a Kabbalistic, we'll call it layer, on top of this custom, and give a certain Kabbalistic meaning. But again, the origins are most likely what I said long before the Kabbalistic ideas came along. There's an idea even later from Chasam Sofer, who's 19th century and was not was in Pressburg, which is part of the Hungarian Empire, which is largely Hasidic, but he was not Hasidic. And the Chasam Sofer writes that the origins were the opposite of what we said. On Christmas Eve, there's a custom, at least with the Catholics, of midnight mass. I don't know if other sects do it, but at least the Catholics do midnight mass. I mean, they go to church at midnight on Christmas Eve, right? And that's like for slichos or whatever they say, right? That's what they're doing. That's what they're doing on the night of December 24th. And what the Chasam Sofer said is the custom for Nittelnacht developed that it should be what's called a kitrug, which means a prosecution in heaven against the Jewish people. That all the Catholics are going to church at midnight and you're at home sleeping. So the custom became that you would go to bed at sunset and you'd get up at midnight and go to the study hall. So when they're going to their church to do their mass, you're going to the base medrash, to the study hall, to study Torah. That's what the Chasam Sofer says. The problem I have with this is he's saying this in the 1800s, right? And the custom's been around for 400 years, and so when the resurrection of the dead comes, I'll have to ask the Chasam Sofer what he meant by that, because it's an interesting idea, but I don't fully understand how it fits in with some of the other stuff we've said. But I will tell a very interesting story just to show the sort of the portrait and the portfolio of what would go on with this concept of Nittelnacht, and that is that the Marsha, who was a great 18th century rabbi, seemingly had the custom of not studying Torah on Christmas Eve. And the local authorities in his town went to report him as disgracing and degrading Christianity by not studying his Torah on their holiday. So they reported him to local police. The local police went after him. As the police were on the way to his house, a book fell off of one of his bookshelves, and he picked up the book and he starts thumbing through it. And just then as he's thumbing through the book, the police break through the door and see him reading Torah. So he was okay. Interesting story to tell and connections. Now, be it as it may, if you ask me as a Barstool historian, the most likely story is the first one I told you, that it was the backdrop of everything we said with Christmas long being quite different than it is today. Thank God today it's been in most communities rehabilitated from what it used to be, but in many communities it was quite a licentious holiday, and therefore a wonderful time for a pogrom. And so the custom of Nittelnacht not going to study was to protect the Jews from the pogroms and keep the Jews safe. Now, just one last piece I'll throw in here is that the Puritans, which were in power in the 17th century in England, and then they weren't the original founders of our country, if you will, but they were the Pilgrims. So they came a little bit after Christopher Columbus, and that crew came. And as America was getting started, there was a heavy Puritan influence. And the Puritans, when they were in power in England, actually outlawed Christmas. Number one, because of everything we said here. Number two is because they felt that if the scripture didn't give a birthday for their Savior, far be it from them to give him a birthday and celebrate it. So the Puritans were always anti-Christmas, and when they were in charge, and when they were in control in England, they outlawed it. And there were movements, and the Puritans never had full control of America, but definitely had control of certain states, especially Massachusetts was a heavy Puritan state, and the Ivy League schools were mostly, for sure, Harvard and Yale were Puritan to start with. Puritans were very Hebrew. That's why if you look on the university emblem for Yale University, it says Ur V'Tam, because it was founded by Puritans. Ur V'Tam, they lighten purity, I guess is what they were trying to say. But like Urim V'Tumim, like the Aaron Cohen, the breastplate. But they put that on there because it was founded by the Puritans. They were very into Hebrew. Just interesting aside on this is that when America was being established as a country, and first of all in the colonies, and then of course up to the establishment of the country, there's a big debate as to what the language of the country should be. Obviously, those who still felt an affinity to England, or at least felt that most people were from England, so they felt that they should stick to English as the language. But there were those who wanted to make a break from England, so they felt it should be something different. There's a heavy Spanish influence in the country at the time. There was a heavy in the country at the time. And after the French Revolution, French was really considered a pretty special language. So there's a lot of debate about it being French, a lot of debate about being Spanish. And because the Puritans had a certain amount of power, what did they want? Not English, but Hebrew. So there was a big movement in the 1600s that the language of the colonies should, in fact, be Hebrew. It would be quite different for us today if we were sitting here speaking Hebrew. I mean, but that was definitely a movement when the Puritans were in power. But along with them being in power in many of the areas of the colonies and onto the states, by the time it was the states, they weren't in so much power. But for the colonies, is that they tried to outlaw Christmas. And it was for this reason we said before about the licentious behavior, coupled with the fact that if the Christian scripture doesn't give a birthday for their founder, then far be it from them to give a birthday to the founder. So suffice it to say, whether it's the December 25th observance of Christmas or the January 7th observance of Christmas, up until modern times, it's been I won't even call it a mixed bag. It's been not so great for the Jews. It's interesting. We have to remember that we always live in the snapshot of history that we live in. So if you ask most people alive today, if we look on the world stage, meaning everywhere in the world, who are we as a Jewish people? Who do we have better relations with? Who do we have a better relationship with? Our Christian cousins or our Muslim cousins? Right? I think most of us would say with our Christian cousins, because while we have certain issues with radical Islam, and even a lot of moderate Islamic groups are not so philo-Semitic, so to speak. They don't love the Jewish people so much. And while there are, I don't want to, there's a billion Muslims in the world. I'm sure there are certain liberal Muslim groups that are very good with the Jewish people. But for the most part, in the past 100 years, the Jews had a real hard time with the Muslims. And in the past, basically 70 years, for the most part, since the Holocaust, we've had a pretty decent time with the Christians. But we have to understand that until the Holocaust and until the Treaty of Versailles, it was the exact opposite. In other words, that once the Treaty of Versailles comes about in 1918, and the imperial and the powers, the won World War I, break up the Ottoman Empire, which was the Muslim empire of the world, and just divvy it out to different parts of Europe. That was the beginning of Muslims importing Christian anti-Semitism. So until the Treaty of Versailles, for the most part, Muslims and Jews had an accommodation. I don't want to say there weren't uprisings, there weren't problems from time to time, but for the most part, we had made an accommodation with each other, we could live with each other. That was not the case in the Christian world up until after the Holocaust and the general liberalization of the Western world, and the shock and awe of what happened at the time of the Holocaust, that it becomes politically incorrect to be anti-Semitic, and we see a downplay of anti-Semitic for the past number of decades. Unfortunately, right now it is on the rise, as people always say. But as I always like to point out, what we call anti-Semitism on the rise does not hold a candle to any other part in world history, where what goes on today is, I can't even call it child stuff compared to what went on in antiquity, not even antiquity, and 100 years ago, 200 years ago. I mean, for those of you who are children or grandchildren, I guess we were only grandchildren of survivors here, just imagine the stories you heard from your grandparents about the Holocaust. Or everyone in school learns Rashi, either Chumash and Rashi or Gemara and Rashi or whatever. Everyone knows who Rashi is, right? Rashi writes his commentary constantly dodging the Crusaders. Like, he writes masterful works that give us everything we have in Torah knowledge, and he's dodging the Crusaders. One of the main commentators on the Shulchan Aruch, the Shach, Sifsei Kohen, was running away from the Cossack rebellion, which killed 100,000 Jews, which were big numbers before Hitler came along. So we have to remember that we live in a snapshot in time where we, thank God, have a much better relationship, because most Jews live under Christian rule nowadays. And we have a much better relationship with Christians than we do with Muslims, unfortunately. But we have to understand that this is a snapshot of less than a century where sort of the tables turned this way. And on the flip side, with the uptick in anti-Semitism, we have to remember that as terrible as it is, and I don't want to downplay it, and as terrible as terrorist attacks are, they still don't hold a candle to the things that our people have lived throughout the generations and the things that we've survived. As one of my co-conspirators, Rabbi Nosson Spiro, who I do the Rabbis podcast with, once said, we were discussing over the summer the drama that was unfolding and literally shaking the Jewish world to its knees, and that was Ben & Jerry's decision not to sell ice cream in the quote-unquote occupied territory in Israel, and which was just, terrible. Like, Rashi had the Crusaders, the Shach had the pogroms of the Cossacks, and we had Ben & Jerry's, right? And at the same time, there was one of the many Netflix fascinations with the Orthodox community had come on there. The show called My Unorthodox Life happens to be the main character I know very well. She lived in Atlanta for a number of years. We were very close with them in those days, but she was still part of the Orthodox community. Terrible show from what I've heard, never seen it. But we were discussing these two topics, and Rabbi Spiro had such a great line. He said, we survived Hitler, we survived Khmelnytsky, we survived the Crusaders, we survived all this. I think we can handle Ben & Jerry's and Julia Hart, right? And that's what we have to remember. Okay, I want to thank you all for coming. Any questions? I'm happy to hang along as long as you got questions. And anyone who's watching on the live stream, just type your questions in the chat box, and I will see them later and get back to them later. Questions, comments, concerns, good jokes, bad jokes, funny stories, anything? Wow, either there's a mic drop or it's all just totally confusing. And
I missed the article too about a Merry Christmas.
my point with Merry Christmas is at least originally it seemed the term meant go get drunk and have a crazy party, and what would often result in that was pogroms and Jews getting lynched. So my main point was there's no problem intrinsically with wishing a non-Jew a Merry Christmas. There's a big discussion in the Shulchan Aruch, the Talmud Shulchan Aruch, about giving gifts to non-Jews on Christmas. But we basically come out, as long as you don't give them on December 25th, that's also okay. But there's nothing wrong with wishing Merry Christmas. Just we should, my point was to point out where the term came from, where the phrase came from. And it doesn't have such a great, I think in the end of the article I said, I'm going to stick to Happy Holidays, but I'll wish someone a Merry Christmas. It's just the historical context is what we wanted to bring out. The article is still on h.com, by the way, if you want to check it out, but we said a lot of it here tonight. So, okay, Talia Landis.
If in the Christian Bible it says that it was during probably the spring or summer, does anyone hold that like Easter would be Jesus' birthday?
The interesting thing is there's another approach I didn't mention that part of it is that there's a certain Christian tradition that the conception of Jesus happened March 25th, which I think they say was Easter. In other words, you know how we say, Moshe Rabbeinu had of those, right? They totally separated, talking about different leagues. But Moshe lived exactly 120 years, right? Moshe was born and died on Zayin Adar. And we talk about how a tzaddik lives 120 years perfectly, right? The Catholic Church got that a little wrong. They say it's conception to resurrection. So they say that he was conceived on Easter, and then 3 months back from that would have been, or 9 months forward from that would have been December 25th. That's another concept how they tried to lump it all together. But I don't think they say that Easter was when he was born. In other words, they even in their Bible, I think, when it talks about Easter, it attributes it to Pesach. It links it with Pesach. So it would make sense. Should I see your hand up? No? Okay. Yeah.
So why don't they question what day it is?
There's a simple AC answer to that. You know what I mean by AC? I'm not PC, I'm AC, because when you're absolutely correct, you don't have to be politically correct. My daughter's quoting my lines. This is a non-politically correct answer to that, but it's the truth. And it is changed in more modern times. I'll say, but for the 1900 years of antiquity before the modern era, this was definitely the case. We're all here at Partners Cleveland. What is the goal of Partners in Cleveland? Get Jews learning Torah, right? Spreading Torah. If you're watching this on Torah anytime later, the goal is to learn Torah, right? We are Jewish people. Are one of our main mitzvahs is Talmud Torah, study of Torah. Mishnah says Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, equal to all the other commandments. Right? We're very, 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 very into learning and not accepting anything at face value. And so much so that Maimonides, the Rambam, even says that in theory you shouldn't even have to observe a commandment before having a true understanding of it. But there's so much to learn, so we at least encourage people to follow commandments without understanding them, with the goal that through Torah learning they'll come to understand all the commandments. That's what the Rambam says. Our Christian cousins deal with things, as we would say in Yiddish, punt verkehrt, the exact opposite. They are told not to question, and they can't question, and until until the Protestant Reformation, but even probably it didn't catch on until long after that, they could read the Bible. The average Christian did not read the Bible until the 1700s. It was not a thing. So they're taught not to question. So they, unlike us, where we were taught in our schools and our yeshivas and to tear apart every little thing and you know, the pill pull, hair splitting on topics and really take it apart and get to the bottom of everything. And we argue on the smallest things like, oh, no. It wasn't Rabbi Akiva who said that. It was Rabbi Yochanan. But it's the exact same thing, right? You look at the Talmud, like we care about the most minute details. The Christian church, for the most part, again, it changed a little bit in the Protestant Reformation, but for the most part, the Christian church has the opposite approach. They don't want their parishioners asking too many questions, thinking too much, questioning the authority. You know, they don't want that. So the simple answer is those in the more, I guess, liberal branches of Christianity know it and say, well, but it's the custom. And those in the more conservative branches of Christianity don't want people asking questions. So hope that answers. Did that answer your question? If not, you can ask it again. So, okay, anything else? Well, I thank y'all for coming. I thank you for listening. And next week, pandemic pending, will be a shmorg, meaning as long as we can get away with it, we feel it's safe, and we feel we're not going to get, be a super spreader. There is a shmorg at Gulf Manor at Green Road Synagogue, starting at 7 p.m. The speakers are Mrs. Rachi Berkowitz and Rabbi Menachem Tannenbaum. And it should be a blast. Again, keep an eye on your email to know if anything changes. I will be sure to call Dr. Fauci no later than Sunday. And we all know how much Dr. Fauci values Torah learning. So, but he'll give me an authentic answer no later than Sunday as to if we have to cancel it or push it, or not cancel, but push it off again. So we will, if we are postponing it, an email will go out Sunday saying it's being postponed. But if you don't get that email, we'll do a good email remind you that it's on. Okay, have a wonderful evening. Thank you.